The world has a habit of naming places before it understands them. They called this Patagonia, the land at the bottom of everything. Then they called it paradise. But the truth, as it turns out, is stranger than paradise. You've probably seen the photos, the glaciers, the granite towers, the water that looks too blue to be real, and you thought, beautiful. Of course it's beautiful. But when you closed the tab, you couldn't explain a single thing you'd seen. You couldn't say why the water is that color. You couldn't say why that one glacier is advancing while every other glacier on Earth retreats. The images stayed, the understanding didn't. Not more images, the reasons behind them, why the water has that color, and what that color is telling you about the glacier producing it. Why one glacier holds steady when the rest of the world's ice is disappearing. Why those rock towers look like they were cut with a blade, and what this place is quietly asking every person who arrives here. But before we begin, one question on hold. We'll come back to it in the final minutes. Why in the 21st century, when human hands have touched every corner of this planet, does a territory the size of France and Spain combined still look as though the Ice Age never ended? Is that a gift or a warning? Here is where we're going. North to south through Argentine Patagonia, Bariloche, the Perito Moreno Glacier, Peninsula Valdés, Punta Tombo, Ushuaia. Then across the Andes into Chilean Patagonia, Chiloé Island, and Torres del Paine. One journey, 8 stops, and one question that runs underneath all of it. No rush. That's the first thing Patagonia teaches you. Three questions. 3 layers of this place. The first, why does Patagonia look like this? Where does that color come from? Why is there a glacier here that doesn't behave like any other glacier on Earth? What made those vertical rock towers that look like they belong on another planet? The second question, what does Patagonia conceal that exists nowhere else on Earth? Not scenery, behavior. A hunting technique passed from mother to calf across generations, documented for 40 years, still not fully explained. And handprints pressed against stone 13,000 years ago by the first humans who stood here as the Ice Age ended. 13,000 years, still there. The third question, what did people do when they arrived? Not the explorers, the ones who stayed, who built churches without a single iron nail, using only local timber and indigenous craft knowledge, who turned a European alpine tradition into something that only belongs here. And the question those communities leave us with, when we come to a place like this, what kind of visitors are we? 90 minutes. Let's begin where Patagonia begins, not on the surface, but beneath it, with the question that most people never stop to ask when they look at that turquoise water. Why is it that color? To understand Patagonia, you have to start with something that happened 12,000 years ago. The last ice age ended. All over the world, the glaciers retreated. The permafrost thawed. Europe, North America, Asia, the land came back to life, and people moved in. But at the southern tip of South America, it didn't quite finish. The Patagonian ice field, sitting on top of the Andes, held on. Not because it was stubborn, because the geography here, the way the Andes catches wind from the Pacific, the way the moisture piles up on the western slopes, creates the only conditions on Earth where a prehistoric ice mass can sustain itself this far from the poles. 24 glaciers flow outward from the southern ice field. One of them is Perito Moreno. It is not the largest glacier in Patagonia, but it is the most extraordinary, because while 90% of the world's glaciers are retreating, losing mass every year, Perito Moreno is holding steady. Some years, it advances. The reason is a concept called dynamic equilibrium. Here is how it works. On the eastern front, where the glacier meets Lake Argentino, ice is constantly carving, chunks breaking off and falling into the water. Meanwhile, at the western end on the ice field plateau, snow is still accumulating at exactly the rate needed to replace what is lost. Input equals output. The glacier neither grows nor shrinks, it holds. It's a kind of rare stability. In a world where almost every natural system is losing its balance, this one holds. 2 meters forward per day, year after year, in a climate where it has no business surviving. Standing below the calving face, which rises about 60 meters above the waterline and descends another 170 meters below, you understand something that no photograph communicates. This thing makes sound. It creaks, it pops, and occasionally it erupts with a crack like a rifle shot as a section the size of an apartment building shears off and falls into the lake. Every 7 to 14 years, Perito Moreno advances far enough to touch the Magallanes Peninsula on the opposite shore, effectively cutting Lake Argentino in two. Water pressure builds behind the ice dam, sometimes for months, and then one day, unpredictably, the tunnel at the base gives way. People schedule flights for this. They sit on bleachers across the lake and wait. Patagonia turned a geological event into theater, and the theater is free. But the rupture cycle, the advance, the dynamic equilibrium, none of that explains the color. And the color is the thing that stops people mid-sentence when they first arrive. For that explanation, we need to go to the base of the glacier, to a process that has been running for hundreds of thousands of years. Beneath Perito Moreno, the glacier is moving, slowly but constantly, under its own weight, sliding over the bedrock below. That movement grinds the rock, not into gravel or sand, into particles so fine they stay suspended in the water indefinitely, never settling. Those particles are called glacial flour. When sunlight hits water containing glacial flour, the flour scatters blue and green wavelengths, the same physical process that makes the sky blue. It absorbs the reds and oranges. The result is that turquoise, and the more active the glacier, the more glacial flour, the deeper and more saturated the color. The turquoise is not just beautiful, it is a live reading of the glacier's health. If you've ever looked at a photograph of Patagonia and thought the color was edited, this is why it wasn't. No filter, no Photoshop, just physics. The ice age is still grinding, and the light is reading the result. The glaciers explain the water, but the mountains here require a completely different explanation. And for that we need to travel north, to a massif where the rock itself has been waiting 12 million years to be seen. This is Monte Fitzroy. The Tehuilche people, the indigenous inhabitants of Patagonia before European contact, called it Chalten, which means the smoking mountain, because clouds almost never leave the summit. The first European expeditions to map this region thought it was a volcano, because no other explanation seemed to fit something so vertical, so sheer, so unlike any mountain they had seen. Look at the face, it is almost perfectly vertical, not sloped, vertical. The rock has a texture like rough sandpaper at this scale, but the geometry is a wall. No glacier built this, no volcano made this shape. So what did? About 12 million years ago, magma forced its way upward into the existing rock, but didn't erupt. It cooled slowly, deep underground, over millions of years, crystallizing into a mass of granite that is extraordinarily resistant to erosion, harder than almost anything around it. Then the Ice Age came. Glaciers hundreds of meters thick covered this landscape for millions of years. They carved, scraped, and removed the softer surrounding rock. But the granite intrusion, the hard core, they could not destroy. When the ice retreated, the hard rock was left standing, exposed, vertical, with everything softer gone. Fitzroy is not a mountain in the ordinary sense. It is a remnant. The thing that could not be destroyed after everything destroyable was taken. There is a phrase for the geological process, differential erosion. But the simpler description is this: Fitzroy is what is left when 12 million years of patience meets 12,000 years of ice. Between the glacier and the towers, there is one more element that explains why Patagonia looks and feels the way it does. One that you feel before you see it: the wind. At the latitude of Patagonia, between 40 and 55 degrees south, there is no major landmass blocking the westerly winds coming off the Pacific. They build up across thousands of kilometers of open ocean, hit the Andes, and pile all their moisture onto the western slopes. The eastern slopes get almost none of it. The result is two completely different Patagonias, divided by a single mountain range. Same latitude, same country, two worlds. The western winds that drench the Chilean side also bring the moisture that keeps the ice field alive. Remove the Andes and the ice field disappears. Remove the ice field and the turquoise disappears. Every element of this landscape is connected, and the wind is what drives all of it. So three things: the turquoise water, glacial flour, ground from bedrock by ice that has been moving for hundreds of thousands of years, the advancing glacier, dynamic equilibrium, where snowfall on the plateau exactly replaces the ice lost at the front, and the vertical granite towers, 12 million years of underground cooling, then millions of years of glacial erosion, removing everything soft. Three phenomena, one origin, the Ice Age still unfinished here. That answers the first question: why Patagonia looks the way it does. But geology is only the stage. What's living on that stage, the wildlife, the behaviors that exist nowhere else on Earth, that is a different story entirely.
and it begins 800 kilometers east of here, on the Atlantic coast. On that coast, at certain times of year, there is a behavior that has been documented for over 40 years. Scientists have studied it, filmed it, written papers about it, and it is still not fully explained. It involves a 6-ton animal making a decision to leave the ocean, deliberately, knowing the risk of not returning. Our journey leaves the Andes now. We are heading east, to the Patagonian coast, where the Ice Age geology gives way to something stranger and more alive.
If part 1 was the story of rock and ice, what shaped this land before anything lived here? Part 2 is the story of what moved in after, and what it did once it arrived. The Patagonian coast is not scenery. It is one of the most concentrated wildlife corridors on the planet. The cold Falkland Current pushes nutrient-rich water north along this shore, and that upwelling feeds a chain of life that has had millions of years to develop, with almost no human interference, which is how you get behaviors here that exist nowhere else on Earth. Valdés is a protected reserve, and it shows. The beaches here are occupied in a way that takes a moment to process when you first see it. Southern elephant seals, South American sea lions, Magellanic penguins, all within walking distance of each other, in densities that feel almost implausible. The peninsula has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1999, not for what it looks like, but for what happens here. And the most remarkable thing that happens here involves the water. Every year, between February and April, something arrives in the waters off Valdés. Orcas, a small specific population, not the entire species, but a particular group of families that return to this stretch of coastline year after year. They have been coming here, to these same beaches, for at least as long as marine biologists have been watching, which is over 40 years. And they come for one reason: the sea lion pups, who have just learned to swim in the shallows, and who do not yet know what is waiting for them. What happens next is called intentional stranding. The orca, sometimes alone, sometimes with another, builds up speed in the shallows, and launches itself, deliberately, out of the water and onto the wet sand or gravel of the beach. It grabs the sea lion, it thrashes, and then in the span of a few seconds, it works its body back toward the water, using muscular side-to-side movements, and re-enters the ocean. The whole event takes less than 30 seconds. The risk is real. A stranded orca that cannot return to the water will die, and they do it anyway. This behavior has been observed and filmed at Valdés since the 1970s. The same families return each season. The same individuals have been identified across multiple decades by their distinctive fin shapes and markings. And here is the detail that separates this from ordinary predator-prey behavior. The young orcas do not arrive knowing how to do this. They watch their mothers. They practice on the beach, stranding themselves in shallow water next to an adult, for no prey, just practice. The technique is not in their genes, it is taught. That word culture, applied to a cetacean, stops some people. But it is the accurate word. Culture, in its most functional definition, is knowledge that is transmitted socially rather than genetically. The young orca did not inherit this skill from its DNA. It learned it from its family, in the same way a child learns a craft or a language, by watching, failing, and watching again. The Valdés orcas have a tradition, and that tradition is older than any written record of this coastline. There is a family in the Valdés orca population that researchers have named the B group. The matriarch, an orca estimated to be over 50 years old, has been photographed here since the 1970s. Her daughters strand, her granddaughters strand, her great-granddaughters are beginning to learn. 4 generations of the same family, returning to the same beach, executing the same technique, in the same season. What you are watching at Valdés is not a natural spectacle, it is a living lineage, a craft passed down. Peninsula Valdés closes the question we opened at the end of part 1. The behavior that exists nowhere else, this is it. Not because of the ocean, not because of the prey, both exist elsewhere, but because a group of orcas, in this specific place, developed a specific solution to a specific problem, and then did something that almost no other species on Earth does with equal consistency. They taught it to their children, and their children taught it to theirs. The ocean here is the same ocean as everywhere else. The difference is the knowledge in the water. 350 kilometers south of Valdés, the landscape looks like it has no business supporting life at all. Flat, dry, scrub and dust and wind.
There is almost no surface water. The temperature swings 40 degrees between season and night. And yet, between September and March every year, 400,000 Magellanic penguins arrive here. To the semi-arid steppe of Punta Tombo, the common image of a penguin is ice, the Antarctic shelf, snowstorms, emperor penguins standing in blizzards. The Magellanic penguin did not read that memo. It nests in burrows dug into the dry ground, small earthen tunnels that look at first glance like prairie dog holes. It raises its chicks in 40-degree heat. It walks through thorny scrub with the unhurried confidence of an animal that has decided this is home, and you are in the way. 400,000 of them. Why here? The answer is the same cold current that drives everything on this coast. The Falkland Current brings cold, oxygen-rich water northward from the Southern Ocean, and cold water holds more nutrients than warm water. That means more plankton, which means more fish, which means a reliable food source within commuting distance of the nesting site. The penguins swim up to 300 kilometers offshore to feed, return to the same burrow, to the same partner, year after year. Punta Tombo is not where penguins ended up by accident, it is where the math worked out. The Magellanic penguin is a reminder that the category of natural habitat is not fixed, it is not a property of a species. It is a solution that a species found, at a specific time, in a specific place, to a specific set of pressures, and then kept. The cold-adapted body of a penguin, originally selected for polar conditions, turns out to work perfectly well in a semi-arid steppe, provided the water is cold enough and the fish are present. Evolution is not prescriptive, it is improvisational. Punta Tombo is what happens when improvisation works and the audience stays. The orcas' learned tradition. The penguins' improvised geography. Both are answers to the same underlying question: what happens when a species has enough time and enough space to do things its own way? But there is one more answer on this coast, and it belongs to the only species here that left a deliberate record of its presence. 800 kilometers west of Punta Tombo, in a narrow river canyon in the steppe, something is waiting that is 13,000 years old and still perfectly visible. Cueva de las Manos, the Cave of Hands. On this wall, over 800 handprints have been identified, pressed and sprayed in red, yellow, black and white. The oldest of them date to approximately 13,000 years ago, that is roughly 11,000 years before the construction of the pyramids at Giza. It is the moment when the last ice age was ending, and the first human communities in this part of the world were establishing themselves here, in this canyon, at this wall. The technique used to create the handprints has been reconstructed by archaeologists. The person placed their hand flat against the rock. They took a hollow bird bone, probably a rhea or a condor. They filled it with powdered mineral pigment, and they blew through the bone, spraying the pigment around the edges of the hand, leaving a negative print on the wall behind. The process takes about 45 seconds. Every hand here is someone who stood in this exact spot, looked at this wall and said, "I was here." We do not know who they were. We do not know what language they spoke or what they called this place. The people who made the earliest prints here 13,000 years ago are the ancestors of no identifiable modern community by direct genetic lineage. They were here at the end of the Ice Age, and then history moved on, and other peoples came after, but the hands stayed. Whatever the motivation, ritual, record, proof of presence, the message survived every population shift, every century of wind, every Ice Age transition. It is the oldest piece of communication in Patagonia, and it is still legible. South of the Cave of Hands, south of the penguin colonies, south of the Orca coast, Patagonia continues into territory that most maps simply label with a different color and leave unexplained. The land narrows, the mountains close in, the weather worsens in the way that weather only worsens when there is no land between you and Antarctica. And at the very end, at the absolute southern tip of the continent, there is a city. A small one. A city that has decided to call itself what the geography demands. Ushuaia calls itself El Fin del Mundo, the end of the world. It says this on the signs, on the stamps at the post office, on the menus in restaurants, on the souvenirs in every shop window. This is not understatement. At 54 degrees south latitude, Ushuaia is the southernmost city on Earth. Below it, the Beagle Channel, then Tierra del Fuego's southern islands, then the Drake Passage, then Antarctica. There is a road sign on the outskirts of town pointing north toward Buenos Aires, 3,079 kilometers, and another pointing south. The southward one just says, Antarctica, no distance given. But Ushuaia is not just a geographical superlative. It is a working city, a port city, and what it services is primarily the Antarctic expedition industry. Every year, hundreds of research vessels and commercial expedition ships pass through the Beagle Channel en route to Antarctica. They provision here, their scientists and researchers transit through. And so Ushuaia has become, despite its improbable location, one of the most important operational hubs for Antarctic science. The end of the world is also the beginning of the last continent. Peninsula Valdés, Punta Tombo, Cueva de las Manos, Ushuaia. 4 stops on the Atlantic coast and the southern tip of Patagonia. And 4 answers to the same question: what happens when evolution and human history are given enough time and enough space to do their own work? The orca develops a cultural tradition, the penguin invents a new geography, the Ice Age hunter leaves a message that outlasts the language, the city becomes the beginning of the last frontier. None of this was planned, all of it required one thing: the absence of interference. That is what Patagonia protected, without meaning to, simply by being so far from everywhere else.
Patagonia, it turns out, has not only been shaped by time, it has also been lived in. And the communities that chose to stay, not to pass through, not to extract, but to build a life inside this landscape, left something behind that is harder to see than a glacier or a granite tower, but no less remarkable. They left a way of being here. In the early 20th century, a wave of immigrants arrived in the foothills of the Andes, German, Swiss and Italian families, who looked at the lake district around what is now Bariloche, and recognized something: not Patagonia, Europe. The same scale of mountain, the same cold water lakes, the same meadows at altitude. They built accordingly: timber frame houses with steeply pitched roofs, chocolate workshops, alpine-style hotels on the lakefront, a cathedral made of stone and wood that could be transplanted to Bavaria without revision. It is the strangest visual experience in Patagonia, standing in a street that looks and smells like Central Europe, with the Andes rising behind it and condors overhead. But the transplant worked, because the immigrants did something that transplants often fail to do: they adapted. The chocolate uses local cacao, the architecture uses local timber. The skiing is on Patagonian snow. What arrived as a cultural memory became, over generations, something that only exists here. 300 kilometers further south, on an archipelago off the Chilean coast, a different kind of cultural convergence took place. The Huilliche people had lived on the islands of Chiloé for centuries before the Spanish arrived. When Jesuit missionaries came in the 17th century, not to conquer, but to establish a different kind of presence, what resulted was not the erasure of one culture by another. It was a negotiation, a shared project. The evidence is still standing: over 150 wooden churches, scattered across Chiloé, built over 3 centuries using a technique that combined Huilliche woodworking knowledge with European ecclesiastical design. No iron nails. Every joint is fitted timber, cut from the native trees of the archipelago. The structures breathe, they expand and contract with the seasons. The oldest among them have been standing for 300 years. In 2000, UNESCO listed 16 of them as World Heritage Sites, not because they are magnificent, but because they represent something rarer than magnificence: 2 cultures that built something together that neither could have built alone. And then, at the end of everything, back in Chile, in the most visited and most photographed part of Patagonia, there is a question that the landscape itself seems to be asking. Torres del Paine is a national park. It receives roughly 250,000 visitors per year. The infrastructure is careful, the regulations strict, the trails marked. And yet, standing anywhere in that landscape, you feel the disproportion. The towers are 3,000 meters. The lake below them is 12 kilometers across. The condors above are not decorative, they are real and indifferent and enormous. The hikers on the trail are very small, which is perhaps the final thing Patagonia teaches. Not about geology, not about wildlife, not about the ingenuity of people who learn to live here, but about proportion. About what it means to be a visitor in a place that predates you by millions of years and will outlast you by millions more. The park designation does not protect Torres del Paine from time, it protects it temporarily from us. 3 questions. And now, 3 answers. Why Patagonia looks the way it does. The Ice Age, still unfinished, grinding bedrock into flour, holding glaciers in equilibrium, leaving towers of granite standing where everything softer was removed. What Patagonia conceals. Behaviors and traditions that required millions of years and almost no human interference to develop. Orca culture, penguin improvisation, 13,000 years of hands-on stone, and what people have done when they arrived. Sometimes they built something that belongs only here. Sometimes they asked a question they couldn't answer. We opened this journey with a question on hold. Here it is again. Why, in the 21st century, does a territory the size of France and Spain combined still look as though the Ice Age never ended? The answer, it turns out, is not geological. It is logistical. Patagonia is intact not because it is protected. It is intact because it was, for most of human history, simply unreachable. The distance was the protection. The cold was the protection. The wind was the protection. What we are looking at is not a conservation success. It is a postponement. The question is not whether Patagonia will change. It will. The question is what kind of people arrive when it does. Whether we come as the immigrants of Bariloche came, looking for what this place can teach us, willing to adapt, or whether we come looking for what we can take. Patagonia is not asking us to admire it. It is asking us to decide if this journey has given you something worth keeping, a single fact, a question you didn't have before, a reason to look differently at a photograph you've seen 100 times, then it has done what it was made to do. Leave a like if it reached you. It helps more people find their way here, and we'll see you on the next one.